Morning. This is an interesting one today. Some of it I think has been going on for about 5 years now to get where we're at to this point. Last little bit, it seems I've spent some time in dark places. Reached across the chasm, but was too far to reach for others. And I couldn't figure out why a person that follows Christ should be in such dark places. And he kind of spoke and said, "You don't understand or know the light unless you understand the darkness." He said, "How do you know my light is good unless you approach the darkness that surrounds?" And I said, "If that's so, what do you see when you look into this?" And it's in your word. It's got to be from your word, not my thoughts. Well, Matthew 9:35, we'll start right there. Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion for them, because they were weary and scattered like sheep, having no shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, "The harvest truly is plentiful. The laborers are few. Therefore pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." When we look at what was God seeing when he speaks to us in these words is he sees those. He sees those that are scattered, that need a shepherd, that need that leader, that person that tells them that, and that's him. It's up to us as disciples to reach into that darkness, to see what's there, to cross that chasm, and we can't do it. But what crossed that chasm for us was the cross itself. It bridged that gap from here to here, that we understand that some things that need to be chipped away, some things that are the fire so that we can be remolded. But we don't understand any of this unless we understand what we're molded from, or to, and from where we were. That makes sense. In other words, we've got to understand where we came from to understand what God has done, to understand how he reached into our own lives to understand what God has done. When he sees that, he sees us as those scattered sheep. And he's longing to draw it for us, draw it to us, bring us into it. But it seems like our words, when we share with others, they fall on deaf ears. They stay ringing in the darkness and nobody hears. No one hears those words for their own reasons, whatever that may be. I know I've felt a lot of times I've written many songs and done a lot of messages, and not you guys, but just when I speak to people and stuff, it's like they fall on deaf ears. You know, people hear nothing but silence. And that seems odd to say. But in the darkness, sometimes all that you're given is that silence and the ability to know that God is still present. If we're in darkness, we walk in a room, shut the doors, and the tables and stuff are sitting there and they turn out the lights. Where are those tables? They haven't moved. So it is with God. When we find ourselves in the darkness, to understand that, with the lights go out, we understand that God is still in the same place he always was. We might just not be able to see him at that moment. He hasn't moved. And when we allow that darkness to be a part of that, his light will soon fade it away. It'll put it into shadows. Because in him, there is no shadow. It's light. But would you understand that? If you hadn't had dark times in your life, would you understand who he is in your life? I look back and think, man, it would have been everything if everything had been perfectly the way I wanted it and the joy that I would have had and all that. But would it? No, it wouldn't have. It wouldn't have been any more than a dream of ours. But when we turned it over to God, it seems like everything went wrong. And we sit and question, why? Lord, I turned it over to you, and this happened here, and this happened here, and that happened there. He said, now you know who I am. He said, when I looked out over you folks, he said, when I looked out over my children, he said, and I see the hurting, and he said, don't you think I understand that? But don't you think I understand even more that I'm above that I reach into that I can reach your heart? That's how you know who I am. There's something for years and years and years been studied called the dark night of the soul. And it seems like everybody that's a Christian will go through some form of it. When everything don't make sense. When nothing seems to be favoring us, when we don't have God's favor, we feel like we're floating alone. And it happens many times in our lives. But each time we get stronger from it because we realize that though we feel alone, though we're floating in this darkness, God is still the light. And I always heard, well, he's the light at the end of the tunnel. No, he is the light around the tunnel. He surrounds whatever darkness we're in. It's not evading his side. It's not somewhere he can't see. And he looks out and he says, I'm doing this for you so I can send laborers into the field to help others along the way also. And there's been times I said, well, Lord, do I have to go firsthand experience everything you want me to tell everybody? Because it just don't make sense. I could have kind of felt what this was like or understood what this was like without having to go through it myself. He says, yeah, but how much more do you know me because you went through it? That was his point. How much more do I know him? And when we send out our laborers in his harvest, we understand him more. And we see more with his spirit. We see more with his eyes. And that's what we need to start seeing is how God sees it. It's easy for us to see this or see that and say this and say that, but God has sometimes a whole different look than we have because some of us would be standing where we are today if it wasn't for his outlook, his difference. What else does he see? Romans 10, 13 through 15. We're going to use a few verses today. For whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. How then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? And how shall they preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the gospel of peace, who bring glad tidings of good things. And it's interesting to note that the preacher don't mean a call position here. The preacher means the ministers of Christ. And we all know that we have a ministry in the kingdom. It's us that takes this. It's us that has him dwelling in us. It's us that has him living in us that's willing to go and cross that chasm and show others that there is a way, that there is hope, there's something to reach out for. And it seems so much, and I don't know if it's because I don't exhibit it enough or don't do enough. I question myself all the time, but why is it falling on deaf ears? Why does it keep falling on deaf ears? Matthew 23:37, Jesus laments. So what is God? What does he see? What is he lamenting? What is he feeling? He says, "Oh Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." And we know that it's not just Jerusalem now that he's talking for. He's talking for his people. He's talking before his people, and he's talking before the Gentiles. He's talking to us as we reach out, as he reaches out. Who are the ones that want to deny him? Who's the ones that want to kill him in his word these days? Who is those that he longs to gather in his peace? But what does it say? As then, I long to gather you, but you're not willing. And we, as we walk in our lives, that's something that we can put before us as we check, as we go through. Are we willing? Not just are we willing to be his. We know that. We put our faith, we put our trust in him, but are we willing to walk where he leads? Are we willing to go through what is in our lives, knowing that he has still got his hand on us, that he's still got to pull us through the way he needs to? And are we willing to accept that? I have a hard time right there because I don't know the ending. All I know is the faith to reach that ending, because it don't always make sense to me. Another one that we have that he sees, Exodus 23, you shall have no other gods before me. Deuteronomy 6:14, you shall have no other gods, the gods of other peoples who are all around you. Deuteronomy 28:14, so you shall not turn aside from any of the words which I command you this day, to the right or to the left, to go after other gods to serve them. The silence that crosses that chasm is a silence that echoes, I do believe, through the heavens and through the earth. The silence that falls on non-understanding, and that's the enemy's plainhold, is to keep silent, is to keep us silent. It's to keep us from talking about the good things God does. It's to keep us to talking about how he's changed our lives. And he wants to bring up the points that the twisted scriptures that he twists tell us that, well, why would God do this? God don't want you to know him. God don't, if you do, you'll be like him. Well, that goes back to Genesis. It's the same story over and over and over that we hear that God sees every day that went back to the garden. Oh, you don't want to eat of that tree. God don't want you eating that tree. You'll be like him. That's why you don't. He don't want you having the knowledge he has. So what do we hear in our lives? We turn to other gods. Well, this will get you this, or this will get you that. And you know what? Gods aren't only a golden bull. They're not only a brazen bull. Gods are anything in our life that pull us away from him. And I know we don't like to hear that either. But I have to check a lot of times what's I'm putting first. None of us are beyond that. It don't matter. I can tell you right now some of the stories I've read of Billy Graham. He was never above that. That was a check that he'd done on his life. He said one of the biggest checks was to keep God first. And that was a hard thing to do. We got so much around us, so much pulling for our attention, so much things to care about, so many of this, so many of that, that we get pulled away and we don't even see the harvest as God sees it. We see the harvest that we're getting into, where we're at, what we need, what we want, which is already taken care of in God's care. What words do we follow these days? Who do we listen? What do we hear? And I'm not just going to get off on one thing or another today. I'm saying it's going to be multitudes of things, but even in our churches, we're hearing that today. What's become our God in the churches? What's become our God among the people that are now scattered once again like sheep? And it's not strange to think that God is looking at it this way, because in his day, he was looking once again about the gods that they had, his people had. Moses came down from getting the Ten Commandments. Guess what? Everybody's worshiping the bull. So it's not hard to understand that in our time. People get sidetracked when he looks at our people, his children, his bride. And what are we worshiping? We're worshiping the God of materialism, the God of what comes today, the God of, you prosper. God's going to do this. God's going to do that, blah, 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 all that. How many people has made that their God? I never said God would not prosper us. I don't know what God has plans. He has an individual plans for us, and I'm not going to sit here and say he won't. But I'm saying, what do we focus on? It's like the old saying. If you want to look at it that way, it's like the old saying, the love of money is the root of all evil. Never said money was. When you look at it that way, when you see that money was not the root of all evil, but the love of it, what do we chase? What are our ministers that are portraying this, leaving the love, the repentance, the wholeness, the fullness that God creates us to be, and they're leaving all of that out, but they want you to send me money and I'll pray and you'll be okay. Not a bad deal when you think about it in the world's way. I might actually make some money that way. Send me $1,000 and I'll pray over a handkerchief and I'll send it to you. They don't make sense. But we understand through the Holy Spirit who God is in our lives. We're the ones now looking through God's eyes that's looking out and saying, oh, well, the harvest, it's plentiful, but laborers are few. And we see that in our own world. When you see through his eyes, we see how are they going to hear without the word? And how are they going to see without the word embedded in our lives to reach others? To know that there's hurt, to know that there's pain. And how do we respond when we can't reach them all? How do we respond when we can't even reach people within our own circle? And that's imagine how he feels looking down on his children. How does he feel when he can't reach the ones in his own world, in his own family? The silence, the chasm of the silence goes on, and he says, here might be one of our keys. He's been delivering parables. He's been delivering the stories that bring people close. Matthew 11:15 says, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Matthew 13:9 says, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Matthew 13:43, then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Luke 8:8, but others, when he's talking about the seed, he said, some fell on the good ground, sprang up, yielded a crop. He tells about the others. But what he says at the end, when he had said these things, he cried, he who has ears, let him hear. So he's telling us as he's looking out over us that not everybody is going to hear. But for those of us who understand, who know the Spirit, who feel the message, who get it, let us hear. And let us not falter in telling others or sharing with others or reaching others. And that doesn't have to be in a sermon. That doesn't have to be in every scripture you've ever memorized. But it has to be in the acts of life that you walk in their path. You know, a lot of times I have honestly found that it's easier to feed someone and then talk about it as to keep them hungry and say, God will feed you. Because when you earn that respect, God opens a door that others will listen. And then they understand we even make mistakes. We're not high and mighty, and we're not dissing them, and we're not putting them in places of understanding. This is what we see when we look out and see that our harvest is white. They're there. There's so much now being put on spiritualism. There's so much put on paranormal. There's so much. They're looking at spirits. They just don't know which is the right spirit to look for. And if it wasn't true, then why are there so many shows and videos and so much about paranormal and let's look for the ghost here and let's look for the ghost? What are they seeking? What is there? What about the friends who've gone before us? You know, it's been kind of dark for me the past year. I've lost a lot of friends in the last year, and a brother. And 2 of those friends was suicide. And yet that puts me in a peculiar place because I wonder what if I could have done more to reach them, if I could have done more, did I fail? And it's easy to think that because they know who I was and they know I believe in the word that there was, and I've done all I know to do. But once again, I don't know where they were. I don't know why. I don't know why we spend time fighting with ourselves while others die outside of us, spiritually and physically. Why do we do that? We get so tripped up in, while we baptize, some sprinkle, some dip. Some go forward 3 times, some bend over once. Some panic and pull the ministers in with them. These things happen. It's just true. Why are we fighting over that, though? We're following the word. We're following the word. Why are we fighting over these things? These things that really, do they mean anything? When we come down to the point of what the Bible stands for is what we stand on, and not so much among ourselves, our true believers. And I'm talking about our true believers, the little things that we don't even need to argue about. Jonah and the whale, or is it a fish? There's an argument, a big argument among scholars where it was a whale or a fish. Once I get to heaven, I don't know, maybe I'll ask God about it, probably won't even care by then. It won't matter to me. So if it was one, the little boy, in school said it was fish. Teacher said, how do you know that it's a fish? Could have been a whale. He says, I just know because the Bible tells me. He said, well, what if you're going to do? He said, well, I tell you what, teacher, when I get to heaven, I'll ask God. She said, but what if you go to hell? He said, I'll let you ask her. But that's my point. Who cares if it was a whale or a fish? Really? Really? The fact is, Jonah was swallowed by something, and it changed his course of life. Same as we can be. We can be swallowed up by whatever in our lives, the darkness itself, if we don't realize that his eyes are on us. His eyes on the sparrow, so he's watching us. I don't understand, but I've a long time thought of this. I'm just going to read it today. But this has been something for years. I've wondered how God would say it. And you all may say, well, that's not a praise song, or that's not this or that or the other. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. But it says a lot. And you'll know it when I start, but just think of what it's saying, okay? Here's what we've been talking about all day. Stepping into the darkness, speaking with it in the darkness where the light is. It says, hello, darkness, my old friend. Come to talk with you again. Because a vision softly creeping left its seed while I was sleeping. Vision that was planted in my brain, it still remains. within the sound of silence. In restless dreams I've walked alone, narrow streets of cobblestone. Beneath the halo of a street lamp, I turned my collar to the cold and damp. Then my eyes were stabbed by the flash of a neon light. It split the night. Did it touch the sound of silence? It's in this naked light I saw 10,000 people, maybe more. People talking without speaking. People hearing without listening. People writing songs that voices never shared, but no one dared disturb the sound of silence. Fools would say, you don't know, because it's like a silence cancer grows. Hear my words that I might teach you. Take my arms that I might reach you. But it seems like my words, like silent raindrops, fell. It echoed into wells of silence. People bowed and prayed to the neon god they made. But the sign flashed out its warning in the words it was forming. It said the words of the prophets were written on the subway walls and tenement halls. And it whispered in the sound of silence. And his voice is always heard in that little, small voice, like a breeze. And let's hope it touches our sound of silence.